I am going to discuss on coral reefs. Coral reefs are the tropical, shallow water calcareous structure supporting a diverse association of marine plants and animals. A unique characteristics of the coral reef that they are formed by certain parts of the plants and the animals that inhabit them. Surprisingly, animals rather than plants are important in constructing reef. Therefore, the coral reefs are biological in origin, and coral reefs may extend over an area of some 68 million square mile in tropical and subtropical seas. And coral reefs are also known as rainforest of the ocean. And what are the reef building organisms? Of all the organisms secreting calcium carbonate, which contribute the modern reef formation, the scleractinian coral that belongs to order Medeporaria under subclass Hexacoralia under class Zoanthozoa are the most important, and they are commonly called stony coral, and they possess a calcium carbonate skeleton. In addition, many reef inhabits octocorallians, zoanthids, sea anemone, and the hydrogen corals also contribute the reef formation. Among the plants, the coralline red algae also secrete calcium carbonate. And what are the mystery behind the symbiotic association in between the coral reef formation? It is an association of the symbiosis that occurs between reef building corals and a special type of the algae. All reef building corals, that's a hermatypic corals that's contain gastrodermal or epidermal symbiotic algae. The algae is Zooxanthellae. So they are the Zooxanthelate corals, and the presence of which that is essential for the survival of the corals and resident population of the Zooxanthellae in this coral that may reach a density up to 30,000 algal cells per cubic millimeter of the host tissue. And coral polyps, which are animals, and the Zooxanthellae, that is the plant, which live within them, they have a mutualistic relationship. Coral polyps produce carbon dioxide and water as byproducts of cellular respiration. The Zooxanthellae cells use these byproducts to carry out photosynthesis. Sugar, lipids, and oxygen, and some of the products of photosynthesis that used by the coral polyps to grow and carry out the cellular respiration. Corals are completely dependent on the symbiotic algae. They would not able to survive without Zooxanthellae, which provide the necessary nutrients and the carbon needed for the coral to build the calcium carbonate skeleton. Now, what are the distribution of the coral reefs all over the world? Coral reefs occurs in shallow water, ranging from surface down to depth between 10 to 60 meters, and that is correlated with the dependence upon the light for the survival of the algae. You know that the sunlight is an important factor for the photosynthesis. So coral reefs also requires clear water, that is low turbidity and low productivity water. Coral reefs are further restricted by the requirement of warm water and occur in tropical and subtropical seas, whether the temperature ranges from 23 to 25 degrees centigrade. They do not develop in that region where the temperature falls below 18 degrees centigrade, and they are conspicuously absent from much of the Atlantic due to water turbidity problems of the Amazon from the other sea. And you know that the water turbidity problem of the Amazons and African rivers, so that's why the corals are conspicuously absent. And passage of cold current through the western coast of the Africa that prevents also the reef formation. Reefs are restricted to the West Indies island of the Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico throughout the Indian Ocean. Tropical Pacific Ocean, the Red Sea, the Bay of Bengal, and the Arabian Sea. The greatest concentration occurs near the equator where the temperatures are highest. The distribution declines towards the south and towards the North Pole. Now, in our country, in the India, The coral reefs are mainly present in the Andaman and Nicobar Island of the Bay of Bengal, Lakshadweep Island, Minicoy Island of the Arabian Sea, Mandapam, Appa Island, Hare Island, Krishadi Island of Tamil Nadu, coast of the Bay of Bengal, and Gulf of Mannar. That are the distributions shown here. Now, what are the different types of the corals? Generally, 4 types of the corals can be recognized on the basis of their structure and underlying substratum: fringing reef, barrier reef, atoll reef, and another reef that is a patchy reef. So first one, the fringing reef. Fringing reef projects seawards directly from the shoreline. They may surround the island as well as the border of the continent land masses. They extend from the coast a few meters to several meters out as a bench or platform with its surface more or less level. It has a reef edge that is known as a reef front, where the most active coral grow. And fringing reefs are the most common type of the reef throughout the world, found in Caribbean and Red Sea. Majority of the Indian reefs are the fringing reef, found in Gulf of Mannar, on the east coast, around the Andaman and Nicobar Island. Next category, barrier reefs. There are also low reefs, but the platform on which the reef grows, that is separated from the adjacent land masses by a water channel. That's water channel is known as lagoon. The lagoon is deep and often navigable. The classic example of the barrier reef is Great Barrier Reef of Australia. Is the longest of the world, stretching over 1,000 miles. Another long barrier reef is located in the Caribbean of the coast of Belgium, between Mexico and Guatemala. And now, what are the difference in between the fringing reef and the barrier reefs? Barrier reefs are separated from the fringing reef based on the depth of the lagoon in the back reef, which is the area near to the shore. Barrier reefs have at least some deep portion, but fringing reefs do not. Another difference is that barrier reefs tend to be much further away from the shore than fringing reefs. Now, what is atoll? Atolls are usually oceanic and without association with the land. They consist of the low reef rising no more than 30 feet above the level of sea and enclosing a central area. That's a water body that also called a lagoon. Breaks in a reef that's provide passes into the central lagoon, and atolls generally rest on the summits of submerged volcanoes. And over 300 atolls that are present in the Indo-Pacific regions, as for example, Bikini Key Atoll in the Marshall Island, Pakafu Atoll in the South Pacific Ocean, Huvadu Atoll of Maldives. That are the examples. Now the last one, category patch reef. Patch reef refers to small, isolated, circular or irregular reefs that grow up from the open bottom of island platform or continental shelf. They usually occurs between fringing reefs and barrier reefs. They vary greatly in size and rarely reach the surface of the water. They are rather typical lagoon features and are often numerous. Now, patch reefs occurs of the north coast of St. Croix in the Caribbean Sea. And the differences in the forms of the reefs reflect the differences in the modes of the origin, particularly in the nature of the substratum. Now, what are the general profile of the coral reefs? All 3 types of the fringing reef, barrier and atoll, show more similarities in profile. The seaward side, that is called the reef front, that is the reef front you see here. The slope of the reef front varies from gentle to steep. The front does not present a flat wall. Instead, there are finger-like projections of the reef, and that alternate the different sandfield pockets from the sea. So that's are known as spur and group, and thus formation of the spur and groups that disperses the wave energy. Behind the reef crest, there is a reef flat that is also known as a back reef, which is highly variable in character. This flat may be short or may extend back several hundred meters. Further back, the flat usually becomes shallow and may even include intertidal zone. The reef flat ends at the shore in case of fringing reef and comes down into the lagoon of atolls and barrier reefs. Reef crest, you see here, that is a reef crest, that is the highest point of the reef, and the part receives the full impact of the wave energy. On the reef front, coral populations extends to depth between 10 to 60 meters. On the intermediate slopes, there is a rich zone of massive dome and columnar corals are found. Below this coral head zone, plate-like different species are also predominant. Now, what are the basic structure of the coral skeleton? A typical coral polyps that consist of a basal plate, you see here, that is the basal plates that lies between the polyp and the substratum, is the bottom of the cup. Then theca, it is a cup-like structure from which the polyp projects out and retract within. Then scleroceptor, these are the calcareous ridges or partitions arranged vertically or projecting towards the inner sides and are connected to the base by the basal plate. Scleroceptor occurs in hexameral cycles and are usually spiny or toothed upper edges. Then columella, that is a pillar-like irregular structure that located solid or trabecular skeletal masses formed by the outgrowth of the basal plates or by the fusion of the central ends of the sclerocepta. Then epitheca, a distant calcareous layer surrounds the base of the theca in ring-like manner. Then costae, the space between the theca and the epitheca that is crossed by the sclerocepta. Then palli, that is small ridges between the columella and the main parts of the sclerocepta. And then synapticula, skeletal bars connect adjacent sclerocepta. Then discipiens, that is a horizontal plates between the sclerocepta. And the last one is a trabeculae. When the horizontal plates between the sclerocepta are large and extend completely across the corallite, that is also known as a trabeculae. Now, the next important part of the coral reef, that is the reef formation. The coral reef formation is not simply a matter of deposition of the new calcium carbonate on the top of the old. The reef building involves constructive as well as destructive phases. Scleractinian corals and the large skeletons of some other marine organism form the framework materials or bricks of the reef. The tremendous pressure under the sea is also helpful in the reef formation. So first one is a constructive phase, that is also known as a rebuild. Stony coral, that is as you know, that is Scleractinian corals, that's mainly contribute in deep formations. Corals are colony and the individual zooids that produce a calcium carbonate skeleton. When the zooid is alive, the skeleton is secreted by the lower portion of the body. The secretion produces a skeletal cup inside which the polyp remains. The surrounding wall of the cup, that is, you know, the theca, and the floor of the cup, that is the basal plate. The floor also contains thin radiating calcareous septa, that is known as the sclerocepta, that project upward on the base of the polyps and that lie between the mesenteries. As long as coral colony alive, calcium carbonate is deposited beneath the living tissue. The coral colony expands by the building of new polyps or by longitudinal fissions. The new polyps similarly secrete calcium carbonate deposition for the growth of the coral colony. Thus, the constructive phase goes on. Now, about the association of rebuilding polyps and zooxanthellae, a significant portion of carbon fixed by the algae during photosynthesis that passes to the corals largely in the form of glycerol, glucose, and alanine. Algae can use bicarbonate ion as a carbon source for photosynthesis. The bicarbonate is converted to carbon dioxide inside the cell in a reaction catalyzed by carbonic anhydrase. The food caught by the coral probably supplies both coral and algae with nitrogen and phosphorus. The symbiosis also facilitates deposition of the coral skeleton. It has been experimentally proved that corals which are deprived of their algal populations or kept in dark conditions deposit of calcium carbonate at a much slower rate than under normal conditions. And algal photosynthesis may increase calcium carbonate for productions by removing carbon dioxide from seawater and driving the following reaction enzymatically. That you know here, there's a calcium bicarbonate, that's a breakdown into calcium carbonate and H2CO3, and then H2CO3 break down into H2 and CO2. And shallow marine water are rich in calcium ion and bicarbonate ions. Stony corals and coralline algae are able to extract these raw materials from the seawater, and both types of marine life have the ability to combine them to form calcium carbonate. This substance, also known as limestone, that is used to fashion the production outer skeleton of the coral polyps as well as harden the fleshy parts of the coralline algae. The corals mainly live upon zooplanktons as per Rupert Barnes 1994, even though the photosynthetic activity supplies also form a major part of their energy requirement. The overall reef building process is very slow. The coral reefs are built over decades and centuries, not weeks or months. The growth rate varies greatly according to species and water temperature. Many dam-shaped corals grow very slowly, only 0.3 to 2 centimeter per year, although vertical branched coral grow rapidly at the rate 10 centimeter per year. The density of calcium carbonate deposition also varies according to temperature and light penetration in the seawater. Now the next one, destructive phase, that is a reef degrade. The destructive phase runs side by side with the constructive phase. The destructive phase may begin long before the depth of a living coral colony. Any exposed surface of the coral that is quickly attacked by different boring organisms, particularly boring sponges and bivalves. Living corals are attacked from the underside, which sometimes leads to the topping of the large stem. When a living colony dies, the scleractinian corals are also attacked by different boring organisms or other environmental factors that reduce the framework skeleton of the smaller chunks. Intervening spaces that are filled by sediments derived from excavated materials and fine skeletal materials from the other organism, as for example, sponge spicule, cells of protozoans, calcareous algae, skeleton of gorgonian corals, etc. And these materials settle into the intervening spaces and slowly fill up the spaces between the larger framework species within the calcareous matter. And the process is known as lithification. Structure is further strengthened by magnesium calcite particle that's derived from seawater, which precipitate and act as cementing materials. Generally, with the passage of time, large constructions are made by constructive as well as destructive phases, and the structure is known as coral reef. Now, what are the theory that supports for the formation of the coral reef? So there are so many theories: Darwin's subsidence theory, John Murray's theory, Penck-Daly's glaciation theory, and submerged bank hypothesis. The first one theory, that's a submerged theory. The theory was origin from the observation of the Darwin during his remarkable voyage in the ship HMS Beagle. According to this theory, all known coral reefs are found in regions where subsidence of land has taken place. He pointed out that initially the coral grew as fringing reef on the sloping shores of an island in a shallow tropical sea. Subsidence of the shore seawater intervenes between the reef and the sea, thus the fringing reef changes into the barrier reef. If the land is an island, the barrier reef becomes an atoll. But in this case, quick subsidence of sea floor, corals are killed due to greater depth and reef growth stopped. So that theory not supports the formation of coral reefs. Then John Marie's theory of sea bottom rise. Sir John Marie reported that the corals grow on the highest peaks of the ocean bottom. That is the highest peak of the ocean bottom. The deposition of the sediments bring them to an optimum level for coral growth. The barrier reefs and atolls are produced by the better growth of the coral on the edges of the coral depositions and through solution of the inner coral rock. But the formation of mound by limestone skeletons and sediments is a very long process, and it requires a constancy of suitable environmental conditions for a long period, which is not possible during tectonic movement and other distress. So John Marie's theory not supports the coral reef formation. Next theory, that's a Penck-Dallis glaciation control theory. The theory was proposed by Penck and Daly for advocating during the glacial period, much water of the tropical is reduced due to the formation of the polar glaciers. And sea level sinks up to 60 to 70 meters. At that time, extreme cold temperature prevailed. Later, with rising temperature, coral began to grow. Coral began to grow on the platform of the ocean bottoms and kept pace with rising levels of the ocean, forming gigantic reefs. But the hypothesis cannot explain the growth of the coral reefs more than 120 meters, which is estimated rise in sea level following Pleistocene deglaciations. Now, the last one theory, that's a submerged bank hypothesis. According to this hypothesis, coral formations occurs on flat pre-existing surface during or after submergence of such surfaces. This hypothesis is mostly accepted, as it explains the existence of a large number of submerged banks, cliffs, etc. occur at appropriate depths at coral seas. Now, how the coral reefs are destructed? When the corals are stressed by changes in conditions such as temperature, light, or nutrients, they expel the symbiotic algae living in their tissues, causing in coral bleaching. Coral reefs are destroyed by the pollution and by the increase in carbon dioxide concentration in atmosphere. When water is too warm, corals will expel the algae living in their tissues, causing the coral to turn completely white. That is known as coral bleaching. When a coral bleaches, it is not dead. Coral can survive a bleaching event, but they are under mood stress and subject to mortality. And what are the triggers behind it? Coral bleaching is a generalized stress response of corals and can be caused by a number of biotic and abiotic factors, such as increased or reduced water temperature, starvation caused by a decline in zooplankton levels as a result of overfishing, increased solar irradiance, changes in water chemistry, soil erosion and sedimentation covers the coral reefs and chokes them, bacterial infection, changes in salinity, herbicides application, low tide and exposure, cyanide fishing, elevated sea levels due to global warming, and coral mining by man. While most of the triggers may result in localized bleaching events, mass coral bleaching events occur at a regional or global scale and are triggered by periods of elevated thermal stress resulting from increased sea surface temperature. Now, so many significance that are carried by the coral reefs. Corals at the reefs are the favorable sites for accumulation of petroleum deposition that are much importance to oil industry. They are the protectors of the coastal lines, and the coastal populations mostly depend on the coral reef ecosystems. Wherever they are present, serve as habitats of many plants and animals like sponges, molluscans, echinoderms, fishes, etc. So they provide protections and shelter of the many different species of the fish. So the coral reefs are known as rainforest of the ocean. They form the nurseries for about a quarter of the ocean's fish and thus provides revenue for local communities as well as national and international fishing fleets. Corals play an important role in controlling carbon dioxide in the ocean water. Some corals are highly prized for their decorative value, such as Corallium rubrum is considered to be a precious stone in India and China, and that is treated as auspicious. The red coral and organ pipe corals are used in some indigenous system of medicines in India. Coral skeletons serve as raw materials for the preparation of lime, mortar, and cement because of their calcium carbonate and magnesium carbonate content. Coral skeletons are also helpful in making ridges that may act as natural barriers against sea erosion and cyclonic storms. Corals provide a barrier between the ocean and shore. Reefs also protect the highly productive wetlands along the coast as well as ports and harbors and the economies they support. Corals also play an important role in the water filtration. Most corals are filter feeders, which means that they consume particulate matter suspended in the water column. This contributes to enhance quality and clarity of our near shore waters. So the protection of the corals, much important. So what are the strategy for the protection? The establishment of a marine sanctuary and preserves may help ensure the availability of the ecosystem in the years to come. The Australian government established the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park in the year 1975 to manage and protect a large part of the reef. In addition, the Great Barrier Reef was designated as an UNESCO World Heritage Sites in the year 1981, providing further protection to this 2,300-kilometer long coral reef system. In United States waters, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and National Marine Sanctuary System is composed of 14 federally protected underwater regions that including more than 150,000 square miles of ocean and Great Lakes water. The following are sanctuaries and protected corals are important: Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary, Flower Gardens Bank National Marine Sanctuary, that is the Gulf of Mexico, Hawaiian Island Humpback Whale National Marine Sanctuary, Northwestern Hawaii Island, and Fayetteville Bay National Marine Sanctuary, that is the American Samoa. And people can also protect coral reefs in many different ways. Tourists make sure not to sit on, stand on, or even touch leaf coral. Divers should rest by floating or standing on the sandy bottom near the coral reefs. Boaters should take care when navigating around the coral reefs. Anchors should not be dropped directly on the reef, but on a nearby sandy area. Take photo of coral reefs rather than collecting dead or living corals, which damages the reef and prohibited in many areas. If you set up a marine aquarium at home, purchase fish that have either been aquarium raised rather than collected from the wild or collected from a Marine Aquarium Council certified retailer. Support sustainable fisheries by only eating seafood certified by the Marine Stewardship Council to help reduce carbon dioxide emission in the Earth's atmosphere and eventually the oceans. So the people can also protect the coral reefs. Now, so many regulation in the national and the international level. Corals should not be collected either alive or dead condition. The United States of federal government prohibits the removal or destruction of corals from all areas of the continental shelf within a 3-mile limit. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission prohibits the collection of living or dead corals or fire corals within Florida waters. Collection of hard corals is also banned in Hawaii, Guam, and Puerto Rico. The conservation on international trade in endangered species of wild fauna and flora regulates international trade of certain vulnerable coral species, such as Indo-Pacific blue coral, organ pipe coral, all corals in the order Scleractinia, all corals in the order Antipatharia. Now, what are the conservation and management strategies done in our country? Ministry of the Environment and the Forest has been identified as the nodal agency for conservation and management of coral reefs as per allocation of business rule. National Committee on Wetlands, Mangroves, and Coral Reefs was constituted in the year 1986. Established Indian Coral Reef Monitoring Network. It's a National Coral Reef Research Center located at Port Blair, and coral reefs in the Gulf of Mannar and Andaman and Nicobar Island have been declared as biosphere reserve. Establishment of database network and website on coral reefs, the Wildlife Protection Act in the year 1972, all reef buildings, fire, sea fan corals put in the Schedule 1 of the Act that's prohibited from exploitation. The Coastal Regulatory Zone, it's a notification in the year 1991 issued by the Government of India under the degrading and underwater blasting in and around coral formation is also prohibited. And implementation of management actions plans on identified coral reefs areas, training and capacity building in taxonomy, biophysical methods, and scuba diving. So that are the strategies done by our country. These are the reference books: Invertebrate Zoology, Edward D. Rupert and Robert D. Barnes; Invertebrates, Richard C. Braska and Gary G. Barska; Biology of the Animals, Ganguly Shina Udikari; Biology of the Invertebrates, Pechenik; Invertebrate Zoology, McLeish and Sodom; and many figures that are presented in our presentation that we captured from the Google image. Thank you, everybody.